Okay, can we have your fifth and final tip, please?
Yeah, so this is about effective multiple choice question design. I'm a big fan, as you are, of multiple choice questions, but sadly there's a lot of really badly designed questions out there. And I worry about early careers teachers who need to be trained on how to write an effective multiple choice question. And I worry because they may go online and look for questions, which I do. But if an experienced teacher's uploaded a quiz, you may assume that that's effective, and it might not be. Probably the biggest mistakes that I see are including an obviously incorrect response, and we can just write that off immediately. And then the other one is what I refer to as the Bradley Walsh effect, which is great on the Chase where they have comedy options, but not good with teaching and learning. So that's entertainment, and I love the Chase, and I love when they do have a funny option. And but when we do that in school, when teachers are trying to be hip and funny, we're diluting the level of challenge and the effectiveness of retrieval practice. Because I see it all the time. Which of these was Henry VIII's wife, Lady Gaga? Which character from Romeo and Juliet, Justin Bieber? Honestly, they're everywhere, and I've probably done them myself as well. So that's the first thing as well. Have a very clear question, especially with the language that you're using, and your correct answer and the plausible distractors. The distractors should be able to tell us something else. And I know you've done a lot about this in maths. I've seen some great examples in primary maths where the three options, we had the correct answer and it was an addition question. And the other option would be the answer if they subtracted or if they multiplied. So then, if they've selected that option, you know exactly where they've gone wrong. And I can design similar in history. I have read a book it's a book just about multiple choice questions by Patty Shank. And she says actually 2 plausible distractors is enough. The more plausible distractors we add, the harder it can be for us as teachers. So we've got that aspect to it. Now this is interesting as well because this is something that Dylan William, he edited a book of mine previously and he's not a fan of, but I am, and research is. So Andrew C. Butler suggested adding "I don't know yet" as an option. And the reason why Dylan William, and I do understand his concerns, is that that's like, and Doug Lamov as well, it's an opt-out way of going, oh, I don't know. The reason why I like it is because it helps students with SEND. It makes it even more low stakes. I have a conversation with students that say, I would rather you say I don't know than just guess. Because if you've guessed, and you guessed it correctly, I don't know that. Although what I will say, there can be recall involved in power of elimination and guesswork, because a student might see a question and not know it, but they know it's not that one, and I know it can't be that one, so it has to be this one. But that's still retrieval practice because they've recalled information. So what I say with the I don't know is for students to be really honest, and if they select it, then I know they don't know, they know, we know there's a gap in knowledge, I'll go over it. To avoid the I don't know, I will perhaps not include it in some questions that are easier, or I will say to students, you can only use it 3 times. Now, Doug Lamov and I have wrote a blog about this. We were chatting, and Doug Lamov made a really good point. He said, well, students will know something, even if they don't know that answer. So why don't you add the option, I know that? And then they get to write something. So I had a question, what does the word conscription mean? And I had the correct answer, 2 plausible distractors, I know that. And it was really interesting because some students said, I don't know what conscription means, but I know lots of men signed up to fight because of propaganda. Some students did know what conscription meant and still wanted to add, I know that. So there's just so many ways that we could be really flexible with multiple choice questions. Great with mini whiteboards as well. Great for elaboration. Why did you select that answer? Why do you think that one is incorrect as well? So there's all these different things that we can do. The primary school that I work with, they have a column at the side for optional working out. And if the student's struggling, they're encouraged to do that. And then again, if they've gone wrong, we can see where they've gone wrong as well. So multiple choice question design, all those things I've said about the plausible distractors, making sure the level of challenge, that there's opportunities for retrieval success, but there's also some difficult questions, and that they are accessible for everyone, that language isn't a barrier either.
Amazing. Okay, three quick points. I could talk to you all day about multiple choice questions, Kate, but just 3 points on this. The first is we made a decision when we were coming up with diagnosticquestions.com, the website, just to have 3 distractors and 1 right answer, just because it made data collection much easier, and you could compare. You could say if only 20% of kids got this one right and 60% got that one right, we could start to say things about question difficulty and so on. But I've also seen with Dylan and also some of your examples that having either more than 1 correct answer or sometimes no correct answers, and often in humanities subjects, one answer's kind of more correct than another, you could argue, and so on. I assume you're kind of keen for varieties of kind of question types with multiple choice questions.
Well, this is something actually that I'm really against, and this is again, Andrew C. Butler wrote about multiple choice questions, and avoid all of the above or none of the above. And there's a few reasons for that. So the first one, if the correct answer, well, students can think that we're trying to trick them, catch them out, and we don't want them to think that. If the answer is all of the above, but a student selects an answer above, how do we mark that? Because if we say it's incorrect, it's not incorrect, it's just not the answer that I'm looking for. But then if we say, oh, that is correct, they may later remember it being correct and assume the other options are incorrect. So especially for younger students, that's really confusing. But none of the above is even worse. Like, what is the point in that? Because we've just exposed students to incorrect answers. You could answer that correctly without knowing the answer. So I use the example, which battle took place in 1066? I list battles, but the right answer is none of the above. A student could get that correct, but not know what battle took place in 1066. Or what if they do? The frustration of not being able to tell you that right answer. And another problem with having 2 correct answers to select is later on, where what if a student gets 1 right and 1 wrong, and then they forget which one they got incorrect or correct, and there's this potential for confusion as well. So especially younger students as well, primary key stage 3, I do think that we keep it simple and consistent. Don't have a word and then a sentence, and in terms of the layout as well. So there's so much research on blogs out there on multiple choice question design that I do think it's really interesting. And another tip would be to look as much as you can at the quizzes that are out there, and I always find great questions, or I find questions that I think, oh, that's good, but I could actually make that a little bit better. As part of my research for Retrieval Practice 2, I answered so many multiple choice quizzes set by teachers on things I knew nothing about, and was able to score really highly because of bad question design. So that's another good point. Could somebody with no knowledge of this still get it correct? Well, it's a bad question design then.
That's fascinating. Just two more points on this, Kate. I've written God knows how many maths. I never want to write another diagnostic question again in my life. I'm over them now. But the hardest thing I find, and you really only know this, I think, when you test the question out. Because you can write a question and think, oh, this is a great question. But then you ask the kids and do a bit of digging, you think, oh, actually, I've missed something. The thing I find the hardest is writing questions that kids can't get right while still holding a misconception, if that makes sense. So I'll give you an obvious example from maths, and I wonder if this is true in your subject. So you could ask a question, this will be a bad example, but you could say, which of these numbers is a multiple of 10, for example? And you have 3 distractors. But if none of those distractors are factors, which is a big misconception kids have. They muddle up which is a factor and which is a multiple. A kid could get that question right while still not being 100% sure what the difference is between the two. So on the face of it, it looks like a good question, but because you haven't identified the kind of key misconceptions kids may have, actually it may not be that reliable an indicator of actual understanding. Is that something that you find in your subject or other subjects that you've encountered, this potential problem with diagnostic questions?
I do think it's really challenging. I honestly think to design an effective multiple choice quiz is not easy. And I'll give you an example of my subject where I asked what year was conscription introduced, and hardly anyone got that correct. And then when I went through that, they went, oh, I forgot what conscription was. They actually knew the year it was introduced. That's why the next question, next time I asked, was which of the following refers to conscription. So that was sort of giving me wrong data, really, because they did know the year, but it did give me useful information because it showed me they weren't confident and familiar with that term. So the other thing as well is trying to rephrase. So your question that you gave there, you could use different examples to try and illustrate that, couldn't you? So you could have different numbers and digits that are essentially asking that same question.
Yeah.
But, and then there should be a pattern that emerges there. If you had within 20 questions 5 that were like that, then that would give you a really good insight. There's also something else actually I want to say about multiple choice questions. Coming back to the Bjorks and retrieval-induced forgetting. So basically, there is information that we teach that is either background, contextual, or like that story about the Tower of London that I gave previously. That's non-essential. Non-essential information should not be on a multiple choice quiz. Only the target memories. And I've done this before where I've had filler questions and I've put in questions that I thought, oh, okay, I'll just add this in. An example was my class, I had 16 questions, wanted to round it up to 20. What was the name of the historian we watched in the video? Then I stopped myself. Nope, they don't absolutely need to know Dan Snow's name. But if I did include that in the quiz, they might assume that, oh, I've got to learn his name because Miss is quizzing me on it. And to say, oh, well, it's harmless, that's not true either because of the retrieval-induced forgetting. The things that we focus on, it will boost their retrieval strength. And the things that we neglect, obviously the retrieval strength will be low. So that could be coming at the risk of something else that is essential, decreasing that retrieval strength and boosting the retrieval strength of something that is not essential. So another tip I have for teachers is go back through previous quizzes and ask yourself, do your students really need to know this? If it's not essential or desirable, remove the question. And since I had this revelation about retrieval-induced forgetting, I deleted so many quiz questions. I had a quiz question about the year Henry VIII was born, and they were shoehorning this random fact into essays. It was actually, no, this is the date you need to know, the year he became king. The year he was born, don't worry about that. I'm not going to put that in my quiz. So always keep it on. I mean, I think maths is probably different, that it's easier, but with something like with humanities and with English literature, I see that a lot as well, about the plot and the characters. And I think, is this essential? So always focus on the essential because of the retrieval-induced forgetting.
That's fascinating. The last thing I'll say about these, because as I say, I really could bang on about these all day, is I can 100% agree that writing a good diagnostic question, a multiple choice question, is really tricky. But I also think it's a really useful thing for staff to do, for colleagues to do, particularly less experienced colleagues, to consider where kids might go wrong, what a good distractor might be, and so on. So an exercise I often do with maths departments, and I'm wondering whether this is something that transfers across, is I'll say, okay, I want you to think of a topic that you're teaching next week or wherever, and you work in pairs for this, and it doesn't matter if it's different topics. And on one side of a piece of paper, you write your diagnostic question, but on the other side, you put your 4 answers, A, B, C, D, and then you swap pieces of paper, but crucially, the person, your partner, can only see your question. They can't see your 4 answers. And their challenge is to think, what 4 answers would they write down to that question? And the other person does it for theirs, and then they swap back and compare. And that's always fascinating because they never come up with the same 4 answers.
Wow.
And then you can have a really good discussion about, okay, well, you included C. Was that because you've seen kids do this in the past? And particularly if you've got a less experienced member of staff with a more experience, they can have a really good pedagogical discussion about that. And then you end up with kind of a really strong question that takes elements from both. Is that something that transfers across, or something that you've tried yourself?
Oh yeah, we absolutely should do that. And it is a shame that that never happens. And one of the things that I really disliked being head of department was all the admin stuff I had to do that was taken away from teaching and learning time in a department meeting. That is how I would have loved to have spent department meetings, and didn't always happen like that. It is great that question banks are available, but again, as I said, I check them, I might edit them, but I write my own as well. So teachers, especially early in their career, I do think, look at what questions are out there, but yes, think about your students and something that has cropped up in your class, or that something has been said. It was really interesting. I spoke to some history teachers in year 7 when we do the Battle of Hastings. The word soldier has been spelt in so many different ways, with a J, with a G, with solids. It's just, and it's really interesting. That was like a common thing that we were experiencing. So we could tackle that as a question: which one is the correct spelling, and use the examples that we have seen. But that might not be the same in a different school, where perhaps they can spell soldier correctly. So I think that sounds, I love your idea of doing that. And I definitely think question design should be part of CPD, and it isn't. And actually even just taking quizzes and sharing them and asking for feedback on them as well. And one of the advices that I give in the book, pieces of advice, is about with cold calling, is what's helped me with that is watching videos online and going into classrooms of seeing other teachers do it, and then asking other colleagues to come into my classroom and give me feedback about how I'm using that strategy. So the exact same thing. When years ago in the history department, we didn't share quizzes. I would create and use a quiz, and my colleague wasn't. And we absolutely should be, because we should be asking the same essential questions with that class and this class, but it was disjointed. So yes, I'm all for that. I think that would work in any subject, and I definitely think it's something that, this is, again, leaders should try and make the time for this, because it's just so important. And it's not something, questioning, people think, oh, you just get better with experience. Yes, you do, but to just rely on that, that's quite a slow learning curve. We can speed that up by working together, reading, engaging with the research, and making opportunities like you've just said.